one map that you did as well, which I thought was very interesting on how you got the data. It was the COVID-19 cases in prisons.
Hmm.
So how did you come across that? I thought that was very particular.
That was a tricky one. That was a
Yeah.
tricky one. So that one I actually I started, whenever something of interest comes up to me, first I just go down the rabbit hole and try to find out what's going on, where the footnotes, as my one of my professors said, you got to footnote chase, you got to find all the sources, got to follow the links and stuff. And so per usual, just like, it was very similar. Here's what I would say. When data is not accessible, a lot of times the folks who try to put that data together themselves are people from the community or journalists. And those two groups are in both cases in the COVID-19 in prisons and the fatal encounters with police. Both of those cases, it was just like that, where community members were providing data and journalists were interested in finding this data. And so I followed those breadcrumbs, and then using my skill set, I maybe scraped some data from online, five different sites, compared it to what was out there. There was some crowdsourcing that was happening. So when folks were contributing their own data, again, whether that's news reporters or community members, then I had to go continue to vet that data. So when we were working on the COVID-19 in prisons in particular, I started doing that work. And at that point, it was also with no specific data set that everybody could look to. Everybody was just like operating in their own little ecosystem. So one of the things, again, for me as an organizer, as a facilitator, try to do is bring all of that together so all the pieces are talking to one another. So eventually, I started to consult with UCLA, and UCLA was doing their project, and they had, of course, a much bigger team than me, researchers funded to be able to do this work. And they ended up reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, can you tell us a little bit about how you got this data and how you've edited this data?" And I kind of gave them the heads up, where to look, etc. I looked at their database. I gave them some, again, not telling them how to do their work, but said, "Oh, well, this is how I've handled it," or this is the data from this prison might not be as reliable because X, Y, or Z. So I've also found myself doing a lot of consulting like that, where then if you look back now, I think UCLA had one of the best data sets on that subject in particular. I don't remember the department it was in particular, but after consulting with them, I'm sure I wasn't the only one they consulted with, but after consulting with them, I was able to put, because, like, again, speaking these multiple languages, I was able to put their developers in the right way to say, hey, you got to use a Postgres backend and you got to use X, Y, or Z. But also when I was talking to their front end people, I'm like, hey, the data doesn't really make sense like this to the layperson. You got to make it laid out a little bit nicer so that the average person can understand what's going on. Because I think a lot of times, again, if we talk about data that is difficult to come by, that's just the first hurdle. Then once you actually get access to the data, then it's extremely dirty and you got to figure out how to clean it and standardize it. And then when you do have it cleaned and standardized, you got to figure out how to present it visually. And then once you figure out how to present it visually, you got to figure out how to talk about it. And so all of those hurdles, I believe, are things that they're hoping for us to stumble upon, and hoping for us to say, "Oh, I got to throw my hands up. I can't do this anymore." And that is, again, that's where those power dynamics lie. And I say, no, let's work together to push each other forward. So I appreciate you bringing up that project. I haven't thought about that project in a minute, but that was a tough one, because that was another one where, oh, well, we can't release this data for X purposes, security purposes, whatever. But also, when that data first came out, it was so like rangy. It was like, well, maybe there was 5, maybe there was 20. I'm not quite we here was our report, between 5 and 20 cases. And what that does is, a lot, when we do have access to that data, even if isn't all the way good, what it allows us to do is advocate for better transparency. And I think that is one of the things that has been one of the greatest outcomes of a lot of these projects that we've worked on, is that when we kind of put pressure on those who are supposed to be providing the data, or who should have the best interests of their community in mind, whether it is, the prison system, or a community or a business who is invested in a neighborhood, and then there's toxic hazards, whatever it is, whoever we put pressure on, and if we organize around that, a lot of times what happens is there is a push for greater transparency. And that, of course, is going to help our communities have more power, because it's going to require us to hold folks more accountable. to how folks are being treated and quality of life and those kind of things.